Well, hello and welcome to another guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm your host, Moshe Amsel, and today I have a high performance coach, and we're going to jump in to see what does that mean and who does she work with and how can she help you in the growth of your law firm. So our guest today is Ingela Onstad, and she is a high performance coach for professionals in the public eye. She helps clients transform their anxiety about public speaking and presenting into confident and authentic performances that stand out. With a background as a professional opera singer, as well as a licensed therapist, she assists clients with tools taken from psychology and the entertainment industry to build skills that help clients shine. Ingela, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Moshe. It's so nice to be here.
So I always start with something really easy, which is, hey, our listeners don't know who you are. Tell us a little bit about yourself. But before I ask you that question, the name Ingela, where does that come from? I've never seen it before.
Well, you and I both have somewhat unusual names, Moshe, so I'm sure you'll relate that you oftentimes have to pronounce your name for people multiple times. I have yet to meet another Ingela out in the wild myself, so you're not the only one. My family is originally from the upper Midwest, and a lot of Scandinavian immigrants landed in the upper Midwest. So I have a lot of Scandinavian heritage, and the name Ingela is a Swedish or Norwegian name.
Got it. Okay. Moshe, by the way, is Hebrew for Moses. And in the community I grew up in, everybody had biblical names. There was lots of Moshes running around. But yes, you are right. In my day-to-day business environment, I tend to not run across Moshe very often. And I get all variations of pronunciation for the name. All right, let's jump into that question. Tell us a little bit about your background. How did you become a high performance coach? What does a high performance coach do? And then we'll jump into maybe some specific things that can be helpful for our audience.
Sure, that sounds great. As you mentioned in the intro, I started off my career as a professional classical singer and landed in the world of opera, which was always my dream. And as it is for most artists, you don't always have a plan B. You have to invest all of your time in plan A, which is becoming a professional, because there's not really time or energy for anything else. And so I really thought my whole career would be in opera, but as these things go, my plans changed. And after about a decade spent as a professional full-time singer, I decided I had been living in Europe, and I decided to return home to New Mexico, which is where I grew up. I grew up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but currently live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I really had to ask myself what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. I was only in my early 30s, so I still had a lot of time to be a career professional. And I really wanted to maintain my singing life, but I knew it wouldn't be a full-time thing anymore. And I had to figure out, what else am I good at? What else interests me? I'm very passion driven, as I think you have to be if you want to pursue a career in the arts. So I knew I had to find a career that really made me feel a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, where I could come home at the end of my workday and really understand in a direct fashion how I was able to impact people. And my husband said, have you ever thought about becoming a therapist? You're the person in the friend group and in the family who everybody comes to lean on and to have a shoulder to cry on, to ask for advice. And a light bulb went off in my head. It was a stroke of brilliance on his part. And sure enough, I enrolled in a master's program. I became a licensed mental health counselor, sometimes referred to as therapist or psychotherapist. And for a while, I kept my therapy career and my music career very separate. I didn't want to mix them at all. I enjoyed having my musical hat to wear and my therapist hat to wear. But I kept on having professional performer friends and colleagues come out of the woodwork late at night, last minute. I would get these texts or phone calls. Help, Ingela, I'm feeling so much stage fright. I don't know what's going on with me. I've never felt this way before. I have a performance tomorrow. You probably know how to help me. And soon enough, a business idea was born, Moshe. I had to pivot into coaching because coaching is the profession in which you, this sounds kind of bad, but therapy is a highly regulated profession. You have a license. Your license only resides in the state where you are licensed. You can only see clients there. Well, I knew if I wanted to reach a really broad range of folks, especially in the performing arts, I would need to expand my business into another iteration so that I could reach more people and do it not only legally but ethically. So I stumbled onto the profession of coaching, which has a lot of similarities with therapy, but coaching is much more goal-oriented, future-focused. You're not giving anybody a diagnosis, you're not billing their insurance, you're not going into deep issues from their past. You are really focusing on helping individuals, what I like to say, reach the final 5 to 10% that they are striving for, sort of at the very, very top of their growth trajectory. And I worked with performers for a good long while. And then, as fate would have it, I happen to have a ton of friends who are attorneys, close personal friends from childhood and growing up. And a lot of my attorney friends would come to me saying, I'm applying to be a judge and I have to go through all of the massive interviews and I get really nervous when I have to speak in front of people. Can you help me? Or during, or, if we can even say after the pandemic, not really, but folks had to appear on Zoom much more, right? Zoom courtrooms and Zoom interviews, Zoom depositions. And then when we all went back into office work and back into courtrooms and such, I found that a lot of folks that I was seeing, they were struggling with very typical, I suppose, manifestations of the anxiety that a lot of us felt during the pandemic. So even individuals who were formerly feeling very confident, let's say in a courtroom situation, or even in a situation such as, pitching your services, building your book of business to a new client, a lot of these folks were suddenly finding themselves more nervous than usual, and they weren't able to sort of power their way or muscle their way through it as they had done before. Yet it's such a highly specialized, I would call it a, quote unquote stage to be on, that they might not have been able to find help with their regular therapist if they even had one. Thus, my career in high performance coaching was born. I use high performance coaching as kind of a catch-all, but really what I'm helping folks do is manage their anxiety, work on their speaking voice and their body language so that they feel that their performance, as it were, best reflects who they are on the inside and how they want to appear in front of others.
Awesome. I love the detail of that story, and really we were able to connect the dots of how you got there. I love this idea of having a coach to help you achieve the best version of yourself. I personally identify as a coach as well, work with law firm owners to help them grow their practice, to unlock true profitability. Folks, if you want more information about how we do that, it's in our elite coaching program. You can find out more at profitwithlaw.com/elite. Shameless plug. But so, Ingela, I really like this, and because Profit with Law, the podcast, is geared towards law firm owners, I want to lean onto that last part of it that you shared, which is perhaps the apprehension or the way that we show up differently when we're asking somebody for money in a sales conversation. Some of us call it in our intake process. As opposed to how we are in all other areas. And it's interesting because when our tone changes, when our body language changes, the other person's able to feel it and read it, and we're setting ourselves up for failure or lack of success, or not achieving the highest possible success by sending that signal in that moment. One of my coaches likes to equate it to trying to pick up a girl at the bar. Excuse me. And there's somebody can walk over to a woman sitting there and confidently say, "I'm going to buy you a drink." Or somebody can walk over and say, "Do you think I can buy you a drink?" And the difference between those two is it can be felt in the way that it's shared. And who's going to want to say yes to somebody who can't even be sure that they want to buy you a drink, let alone have the drink with you, versus somebody who's they're sauntering up to the bar and just getting a drink, and hey, one of them's on me. So we have to approach the sales conversation the same way, and I want to lean into that. So I'm assuming that the reason we do that is some sort of fear. Can you talk about why are people apprehensive to ask for the sale? Why do we lose our ability to be confident in that moment when it comes to the pitch or the actual, hey, do you want to become a client of mine?
Yeah, I think it's written in a lot of different things, Moshe, but you mentioned, the energy that we bring to any interaction. You also, when you were giving that example of picking somebody up at the bar, you used different words, etc. I find that in general, and forgive me, I will often speak in very broad strokes and broad generalizations when it comes to different career types and different types of personalities, but I know there are always exceptions to the rule. By and large, the attorneys that I know and the attorneys that I work with are very confident people. Now, their confidence, however, is sometimes highly based in their skill, in their acumen as an attorney, in their education, their pedigree, the connections that they have. This is a different type of confidence than selling. Selling is a completely different brand of confidence. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that not a ton of law schools out there are really giving folks a bunch of information on how to build a successful small firm and how to sell, how to pitch, how to come across confidently. So it's almost like when you are a very high functioning, highly intelligent, highly cerebral person, as most attorneys are, they do have a lot of confidence in those areas of life. And then they get to another area. I like to call them the different stages on which we are performing. So maybe the stage is in front of a client trying to pitch your services to them. And suddenly they're struck with a lack of confidence, or they find themselves stumbling over their words. And this can really shake folks' identity about themselves, because they suddenly go, hold on a second, what just happened? I know myself to be confident. I do good work. I have good relationships with my clients. I win cases for them. And why am I suddenly feeling so nervous about something? I suppose we could look at it more globally as well and say that in general, when it comes to asking someone for money, we are feeling vulnerable. And very few of us enjoy feeling vulnerable. So when that vulnerability kicks in and we're sitting in front of that person essentially saying, hey, do you like me enough to give me your money? Do you have enough confidence in me to part with your hard-earned cash? That's a very vulnerable moment, and we can no longer live in the intellectual realm, as many of us like to do, and I believe many attorneys feel very comfortable in the intellectual realm. Suddenly we're in the emotional realm of things. And that emotional realm, depending on how much experience we have or how much background we have in exploring our emotions and learning how to cope with difficult emotions that come up, we may feel caught off guard by this sudden almost change of temperature, let's say, within our bodies and ourselves.
Yeah, very interesting. When we start looking at what the cause of it is, I guess we can start to uncover the surface of how we might go about fixing it or getting around it. So talk to us about what are the types of things that you do with your clients? Are there specific exercises? Like, how do you get somebody who's saying, hey, I don't know what's going on with me. I get to this point where I start to pitch our services, or I tell them what our fees are going to be, and I start stumbling over my words. I can't get the next word out of my mouth, and this just doesn't feel good to me. What are the ways or techniques that you use to try to get somebody past that?
I believe in starting with basic biology and giving folks some information and education about their bodies and the way we evolved as humans. And I think a very important piece of this puzzle is the deeper understanding that nothing has gone wrong if you're suddenly feeling afraid or vulnerable or nervous or anxious. It's very human and it's rooted in our biology. Now, if we think back to, even a few hundred years ago, we would have been living in smaller groups or tribes. We would have been more dependent than we are right now on one another for safety and survival. Now, that being said, we are still incredibly dependent on one another for our overall health and well-being. That's a very important aspect. But this would have been a matter of survival back in ancient times. So it is very, very important to us, whether we believe this or not, that other people like us, that we are accepted into the greater group, that we are respected, that we are cared for. So when we have a moment where we feel like we may offend somebody or alienate someone or have someone not like us, it triggers some very deep, very ancient biological impulses to be liked, because being liked is equated with being safe. So there's an aspect to our biology that is like an ancient alarm system. And this ancient alarm system gets tripped in certain situations, and we don't have full control over that. Now, I know from, certain individuals that I have worked with before, this definitely applies to some attorneys and also other professionals. Not everybody likes that news that I share with them, because we live in a time where we would love to believe that we can just completely not care what other people think about us, and that it doesn't matter, and that feelings are for weaklings, etc. But this is just a part of our biology we can't ignore. So I love to start with that piece so that we have normalization of what we are feeling, and we recognize that nothing has gone wrong with me. I'm just a normal human being, and this is the way normal human bodies react to stressors in our environment. So from that point, Moshe, I love to work with clients in 3 different main ways. The first way, and this is where I generally tend to start with attorneys, because I find that they resonate with these concepts very quickly and easily. I start with the cognitive aspect of dealing with emotions such as anxiety or intrusive thoughts. So we explore through a series of exercises and practices, what is it that my brain is saying to me all day long? Are these messages? Because we think somewhere, experts presume we think somewhere between 20 and 40,000 thoughts per day, which I find kind of unbelievable. If we can become more aware of the mental chatter that's constantly running in the background, we are likely going to find a lot of self-destructive or self-harming or non-supportive messages that we keep repeating. Maybe we pick these up from childhood, from our family of origin, from greater society at large, but our brain is essentially hardwired for negativity. This is a real boon for attorneys. It's shown that people who can be highly pessimistic and skeptical can be very successful in professions such as law, because they can see things coming down the pipeline. They can forestall bad events. So we take this sort of inborn, innate, negative factory setting that we have, which is helping keep us safe in this big, dangerous world, and we want to learn how to take a step back and examine it so that we can decide which messages we want to keep and which messages we would like to change into something more helpful and supportive. Now, this is not just about positive affirmations, because I, for one, believe that positive affirmations work only rarely, because if I, for example, think that I'm terrible at pitching to clients and I have that mental chatter running in the background all the time, I can't lie to myself and say, I'm great at pitching to clients, because my brain goes, no, you're not. That's a load of BS. That's untrue. So we have to work to find positive self-talk that is not only more supportive, but also has a dose of realism in it. So maybe that would be helping client develop some self-talk that would go something like this instead. Although I may not always be the most confident at selling, I know with time and effort, I can learn to get better at it and excel in this area as well. So if I have a client that I'm working with who really struggles with this, if we help them develop some more positive self-messaging like that, it literally becomes something that they can rehearse. They can write it down somewhere, they can look at it, they can use it as a little boost or a little reminder that we all have the capacity to grow. So after examining the cognitive aspects of things, Moshe, I tend to also—
I'm just going to interrupt you, Ingela, for 1 second, just on that point. Does that work for everybody as far as, having a mantra and just reciting it and doing it over and over, and that repetition makes a difference? Or is there only certain type of people that would work for? Second question to piggyback on that is, how frequently do you need to be reciting that? Is it daily? Is it multiple times a day? Is it before every sales conversation? What is the actual technique?
So I would say that it's going to be different for every person. The reason I like to focus on these three different areas is because some of the cognitive things will resonate with some folks, and some of the cognitive aspects won't resonate with them. And there are many more cognitive aspects that I could go into. I think for a lot of us, it's about understanding our brains better. And once we are armed with that information of the types of what we call cognitive distortions, or we could also call those negative thought patterns that we are engaging in. There's a whole list of them out there, and folks can actually just Google them and look them up, typical types of cognitive distortions. So if we find that we tend towards thinking that is, for example, very black or white, we can then address that. We can notice it, we can label it and say, why am I so stressed right now? Oh, it's because I'm thinking about this issue or this challenge in a very black or white fashion. Aha, that's right. I tend to do that. Let me see if I can find more shades of gray in here. If I can do that, hopefully I can alleviate some of the discomfort in the worry that I'm feeling. As for the mantras, some of my clients will have little notes all over the place, or they will write out some thoughts for the day that they would like to be practicing, and they'll take a peek at that every so often. Some people, that strategy doesn't resonate with them at all, and they would rather use some more of the body-based or the physical calming strategies. So it really depends person to person, but I think, to give your listeners a little tip, if some of what I'm saying right now resonates with them, you could create a little list of new thoughts that you'd rather be having about something that you are worried about. Once again, these thoughts need to be supportive, yet also realistic. They can't be too pie in the sky, otherwise we don't believe them. And you could post that on a little Post-it note or a little notepad by your computer, and before you're about to go into a sales call, you could take out your notepad and just sort of read down that list and remind yourself that you're not stuck in your way of thinking, that there are different perspectives to take, different attitudes. And it can be as simple as this. With the self-talk that we are using, would we speak that way to our spouse, to our child, to our friends? If not, then it's time to speak a different way to ourselves as well. So I hope that sort of answers it for you, Moshe.
Yeah, and I don't know if this falls under the cognitive approach, but I think it does. One of the things that I help my clients with this specific thing in particular, one of the things that you pointed out is that often when we are having difficulties in the sales conversation, it's because we are in that place of not knowing whether that person is confident enough in our abilities, whether they like us enough. And what happens is when you make the sales process about you, that brings all of that stuff up to the surface. In reality, when you are presenting your offer to somebody, when you're presenting your service to somebody, what you're doing, if you think about it in their perspective, is you're giving them a lifeline. You're giving them a solution to a problem. You're presenting them with an opportunity to get something solved. And if we approach it from their lens and their perspective, how could we not be confident in giving it to them? Because you're definitely confident in this being the right solution for them. Otherwise, you wouldn't be selling it to them. So I think that just by approaching the sales conversation, and maybe this is another mantra, like, I want to help somebody. I'm going to, you can even word it around, there is somebody in pain right now that I'm able to help bring out of that pain or solve that pain by providing my services to them. And that's my goal for today, is to relieve somebody of their pain. Could be another angle to come at cognitively, to reframe the conversation and just remove all of that self-doubt from it, because it's not about us.
Yeah, I love that. And I fully agree with what you're saying, Moshe. And I would definitely call that a cognitive approach. And you used the exact word I was about to mention, which is a cognitive reframe. And what you were saying before about us being in the sales process and being really stuck in our heads and worrying, do they like me? Do they think I'm good enough? Do they have confidence in my abilities? That does really divide our attention. And what we're doing there is a specific kind of cognitive distortion called mind reading. We're trying to get in the mind of our client and we're making assumptions about what they may or may not be thinking about us. And I'm sure your listeners will relate to this, and I relate to this as well as a coach. I don't always know how a sales call is going to go. Sometimes the client arrives to the consult and we're going to have a chat, and near the end of that chat, I'm feeling one way or another. Maybe I'm not feeling so confident in this client. And then they surprise me and say, sign me up right now, Ingela. So we see that we as humans, we tend to really get in others' heads and make assumptions about what they are thinking about us. But I like how you created that more encouraging and supportive mantra or message to say to yourself, I am here to help people. I'm offering them a lifeline. I believe that what I do can help them. And then whether the client signs up with us or not, signs the contract or not, we can still remain in some of our power and say, good, if not this person, then the next person. And another cognitive reframe or mantra here could be something along the lines of, not everyone will buy from me, and that's okay. Because as I say to my performing artist clients, we cannot walk on a stage and assume that every single person in the audience is going to like us. If you and I compared our Spotify playlists, Moshe, we'd probably find really different things. And maybe we would find some similarities, but I would say, oh, that's interesting. Moshe likes different music than I do. And that would be okay with me, right? But oftentimes when it becomes personal, when it's me trying to sell something or me performing something, our brain tells us, if not everybody likes me, if not everybody buys from me, then I'm a failure. And that's a very, once again, black or white pattern and way of thinking about things.
Yeah, I love that comparison to the music playlist. That really helps you to envision, like, okay, I can have differences with somebody and it's not a bad thing. And when somebody isn't saying yes to the opportunity I'm providing to them, or they're not sold on it, that doesn't mean that's not a bad thing. It's not a judgment on me or the service that we're providing, any of that. There's so many other things at play. It can just be that they like a different style of music.
Yeah, I mean, when I have folks come in for a consult with me, I try to be very mindful and do these same things with myself and remind myself that I am not for everybody and I don't have to be for everybody. If I was for everybody, I wouldn't even know what to do with that amount of clients, right? That would be a whole new problem in my life. And I want the people to work with me who feel like they resonate with me, my message, my appearance. It's all of the things. I want them to find the right fit for themselves. And if I'm not it, that's okay. So I think part of this fear that we all also feel, Moshe, is a real true scarcity mentality. And I don't even know if it's fair to call it a mentality, because I do believe that we're born this way. We're born clamoring for as many resources as we can get our hands on, because that will ensure our survival. So it's not that we're greedy or selfish, it's that we're hardwired to survive, and we will do anything we can to survive. And our brain tends to view things like there's only a pie, there's one pie. And if you get more of a slice than I do, that's less for me. But I choose not to believe the opposite. I choose to believe that opportunities, clients, etc., are abundant. And if I can remind myself of that, then I don't have to take it so hard when somebody doesn't want to work with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the pie analogy, we just need to think about, how do I make it a bigger pie?
Sure.
All right. So you had two more for us. Cognitive was the first. Let's jump into the second.
The second one that I tend to go for, and sometimes I start here, but it depends on the client and what they're interested in learning first, is definitely the physical aspects of anxiety and how it manifests in our bodies, because it can be incredibly empowering and very simple to teach clients some physical calming strategies. I have certain breath exercises that are biologically proven to slow down our heart rate, slow down our respiration rate, get us out of fight or flight, or at least have us in less of an elevated state of fight or flight in nerve-wracking situations. We can explore different somatic approaches, somatic meaning different approaches that involve the body and the physical self. I'm not sure if you will agree with me here, Moshe, but I will go out on a limb and say that all of the attorneys I know and work with tend to be very head focused people. They tend to be a little bit more on the disembodied side versus, for example, the performers I work with. The performers tend to have more connection to their bodies, and it's because their bodies are their instruments and they've had to develop that awareness throughout their lives of, ooh, what's going wrong here? How am I using my body for this movement on stage, etc. But when you've been very head focused in your life, you tend to ignore or discount the messages that your body is giving you. And it can be incredibly empowering to work with clients on finding ways to calm the physical body. It doesn't involve having to talk ourselves out of anything or talk ourselves into anything. But very head focused people tend to believe that they should be able to fix everything just with their brain alone. And oftentimes the brain and the body aren't communicating well, and we can actually talk to the body more quickly and get it to, let's say, work with us more quickly than our brain will.
And you have a quick exercise that we can actually do here on the podcast to give people something to try this out?
Yep, I sure do. This is probably the trick that I start with most often, either on podcasts or interviews or workshops that I give, lunch and learns, in client sessions. This one I call the hissing breath. What we want to do here is, okay, well, let me back up. If you run into Joe Schmo on the street and you say, hey, Joe, take a deep breath. Joe will take a deep breath, and I'm sure if your listeners at home do this with me, it'll look something like this, whether they can see me or not. I'll have a big raise in my shoulders. I'll have a big noisy inhale and a big noisy exhale, and my upper body will kind of tense up and my shoulders will approach my ears, and then I'll go like that. So that's how most folks think a deep breath looks like. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And if you do that a bunch of times in a row, you are likely going to feel worse than when you started because you are taking in too much oxygen and you actually need to be slowing down that rate. So what we do here in this one version of a calming breath strategy is we take in a very, very easy inhale. We want to make sure that our upper body remains calm. So we're not trying to tank up. If we're thinking of the lungs like a gas tank, I would say you want to aim for your tank to be half full on this inhale. And then we are going to either hiss out the exhale like a snake, or we're going to blow it out like we're blowing out a candle there, or we're blowing through a sort of kissy face. So the folks who are going to watch this on YouTube are going to be able to see me doing it, but I will do the hiss first, just so the folks who are only listening can understand it. So I'm going to take a really easy inhale and then hiss out my exhale. Once I've reached the natural end of that, I take an easy inhale again. I can also blow this out like I'm blowing out a candle. What we're doing there, Moshe, we would want to do that 5 to 10 times in a row. By creating the hissing sound like a snake, or by blowing out the exhale like we're blowing a candle or through a kissy face, we are effectively damming back the exhale so that it slows down. If we exhale with a wide open mouth, there's only so much we can control it. And I'm done. But if we can extend the length of that exhale by creating a smaller aperture for our exhale, what that does there, it has just this cool magical effect in the body. It stimulates a nerve in our body called the vagus nerve, which is responsible for calming the system and getting us into a calmer state, which in scientific terms is called rest and repose, or sometimes rest and digest. So when we are very activated, nervous, anxious, we are in some level of fight, flight, or freeze, and we want to be able to get out of that. So what we do is we do that long exhale, and there's a magic ratio. It's 1 part inhale to at least 2 parts exhale. So by doing the hissing or the blowing breath, we have definitely done that. We have definitely extended the exhale. And once again, for whatever reason, just due to the way that we are brilliantly designed, this long exhale stimulates the vagus nerve, which stimulates our rest and repose response.
Really, really interesting. And actually, the hissing sound that you made made me think of my Crockpot Express or Instapot releasing the valve and the steam getting released. It can only be released at a certain rate, so it just keeps going until it decreases the pressure inside. So I don't know if this is anything scientific to what you're doing, but I imagine that it would be a similar thing where we have this pressure inside and we're releasing it slowly to decrease and deflate that pressure, instead of like a balloon popping where you're just a immediate release.
Yeah, yeah, and I love that image that you use. So if that helps folks at home, then envision your Instapot or and that long, long, long exhale. And it's not a matter of whether this works for you or not. We all have a nervous system that is built the same. And so if we do this long enough, we're going to find a calming response. There are many other breath activities we can do, some which vary those ratios a little bit depending on how we're doing. But I find this one is quick and effective and works in many situations and can be easily used. And I've used it even sitting on stage before I'm about to sing with a symphony and I'm sitting up front as the soloist with my music in my lap and my big fancy gown. I will look out at the audience and I will be smiling, but I will be letting the smallest stream of exhale escape from between my smile. So we can do this even in a client call or in a client meeting, and nobody has to be the wiser.
Very, very interesting. Real quick question, a little bit, I mean, it's on topic, but a little bit of a detour. So I'm a paramedic in my spare time. And one of the things that we do is when somebody has a unhealthy rapid heart rate, the first thing that we do before we go to medication treatment is to try to get them to stimulate the vagus nerve and cause a decrease in their heart rate. And the things that we're taught to have them do is to bear down like they're pooping. I personally suffer from SVT. So when my heart starts to beat rapidly, what I do is I hold my breath for a very long time, almost to the point where I feel like I'm going to pass out, and then I let it go. And that works for me. I'm curious if these other ways of stimulating the vagus nerve do the same thing for this particular purpose, or is there something different about this vagus stimulation that makes this work effective, super well?
Gosh, that's a really good question. And thank you for sharing that information with me, because I find that very interesting that sometimes, yes, a breath hold can help us. I'm going to take a stab at this, but I don't know if I'm correct. But my hunch would be, Moshe, that so the vagus nerve also innervates the diaphragm, which is the main muscle that's used in our breathing apparatus. Many people don't know the diaphragm is the second largest muscle in the body, which is very fascinating, but it's an involuntary muscle. So I can't just force myself to, can't just talk to my diaphragm. But I think that there's something about releasing of the exhale that allows the diaphragm. So, okay, we're going to get into, kind of technical breath description here, but being a singer, this is also something I have to think about. When we inhale, our diaphragm, which sort of is like a big umbrella looking muscle that's opened up in our inside our rib cage. When we inhale, the umbrella sort of deflates or sort of almost turns inside out. The diaphragm pushes down towards our pelvic floor. And then when we exhale, our diaphragm raises again into that more umbrella shape. So it sort of has this motion going in it. I would think that the breath hold would have the diaphragm just be descended and keep it there. But when we do a slow exhale, what we're doing is we're allowing the diaphragm to just raise slowly. And my guess would be there that the breath hold could be very effective too, but that slower movement of the diaphragm helps slow down the respiration rate, so that when we return to just normal breathing, it's almost like we have retaught our diaphragm to slow down the breathing process. And when the breathing process is slowed down, the heart rate is slowing down, and we're finding greater levels of well-being and calm in our bodies. So, and I think too with the exhale, if we're feeling very, very anxious, I wonder, and you can maybe report on this, if the breath hold could feel a little stressful too sometimes.
Yeah.
Whereas exhalation can feel calming.
It definitely, I definitely never associated it with a calming effect. But then again, there's, when I'm doing it, my heartbeat started to race, and if I don't break it fast enough,
Yeah.
it will gallop away, and I won't be able to break it myself and have to go to the emergency room and get electrical cardioverted. So there's a little bit of anxiety and pressure to get it to work when I'm doing
Sure.
it. So I haven't really thought about it as a relaxing experience, but I can definitely be more aware of it the next time I try it and give it a shot. I can also try it when I'm not experiencing tachycardia and see if it gives me that calming effect, or compare the two. And that's where I think, you kind of need to play around with it and see what works for you. Is, everybody's different. And so these are just different ideas and techniques that you can try. But I love that you were able to share that exercise here on the podcast, because one of the things that I want to do is make this specific episode as valuable as possible to our listeners. So now they have something that they can tangibly walk away with and do. They can write themselves a mantra, and they can also do this breathing exercise. What is the third thing?
The third thing, and this is a little bit murkier territory, would be approaching the emotional aspect of what it is that we're going through. And I find that this also needs what we call some, this is a funny term, but psychoeducation. Folks need some psychoeducation around emotions, just meaning they don't understand how emotions work. We live in a culture that tells us that we should be able to control our emotions, that we shouldn't feel certain ways. Perhaps growing up in the family we did, certain emotional states were more allowed than others. Some families are very comfortable with anger, let's say. Some families absolutely want to banish all anger and pretend like it doesn't exist. Some families only want folks to be happy. Some families say, "What are you so happy about?" If a kid was, giggling about something. So we all grow up with this specific messaging about emotions being good or bad. I like to remove all of the positive and negative monikers from emotions and just say it's a rainbow. We have a rainbow of emotions. We are all going to feel all of the different colors of the rainbow, of which there are many more shades than in the typical rainbow. And our goal is not to banish anything or to fool ourselves into thinking that we can just no longer feel anxious, because that is literally impossible. It's a losing battle. We're just going to get frustrated and upset with ourselves if we try to banish that. So recognizing that we perhaps have more comfortable emotional states and less comfortable emotional states, that's sort of the beginning. Once we have been able to identify for ourselves what are the emotional states that I find very uncomfortable, and it's going to be slightly different for everyone, then we can begin doing a deeper exploration of what it means to feel that emotion. And the reason I said that this is a little bit murkier territory is because much of this emotional work, some of it is physical, because emotions really do reside in the body. If you ask a little kid, "Hey, when you feel angry, where do you feel it?" A child will point to the parts of their body where they feel certain emotions. That's oftentimes where we start off in therapy with children. It's just helping them identify where their emotions are sensed or felt in their bodies. But we as adults, we get kind of far from that. And we, like I said, we want to banish certain emotions. So part of this is the ability to recognize emotions, to learn how to identify how they are manifesting in our lived experience, in our physical experience, and then figuring out, how can I cope with these emotions that are difficult? How can I process them? What a lot of us want to do is we want to just put them all in a box and put that box up on the shelf and ignore it and pretend it's not there. Well, in therapy circles, we say if you do that too long, too often, over too much time, you're putting all this stuff in a box, you're swallowing it, it's going to start coming out sideways. That's when you come home and you start, yelling at the dog, and you're like, "Why am I so mad at the dog?" So things start coming out sideways.
Back to my pressure cooker analogy.
Yes, exactly. Back to your pressure cooker. The steam is going to start slipping out. Eventually, you have to open up that vent on the machine to let some of this pass through. That's a natural process. If we just try to keep that Instapot closed the whole time, we're going to have a mess on our hands eventually. So how do we process emotions? Well, there's different strategies we can work through. Sometimes it's deeper work like journaling or being introspective, or even just recognizing our emotional experiences in our body. There are emotional processing tools that we can take from psychology or Buddhism. Mindfulness can be a helpful way of processing emotions. So some folks feel really comfortable with the emotional processing aspect, some don't, and they would rather stick to the cognitive and the physical realm because I think oftentimes it can come across as more tangible than the emotional stuff. But for many clients that I work with, recognizing how to process emotions in a healthy way and cope with them is also a big part of the process, and brings a lot of introspection and awareness.
Very, very interesting. I took a lot of value out of all three of these, and I almost feel like it's not, if this one doesn't help, then try this one. But if you can start implementing each of these into your practices, they kind of feed off of each other, right? Like the breath work is going to help you eliminate the buildup of the things that you ignore. When you stop ignoring them, there'll be less buildup, which requires less breath work, but the breath or makes the breath work more effective because you don't have as much to get rid of. And then the cognitive side, the logic is more effective when don't have the emotions and the body working against you in that process. So it's almost like if you can get the trifecta all aligned in the right way, you can become a super powerful person when it comes to, or in your words, right, high performance individual, when it comes to something that you are trying to achieve. And in our example, it's the sales process, but it's also leadership, right? I mean, you're running a business. Being a good leader is not something that comes naturally. It's not something that happens on its own. And just like in the sales example, you're going to have a lot of doubt and uncertainty about your abilities. And when you approach it from there, it's going to make you an ineffective leader. Leadership needs to be strong, and you need to be a good example to your team. So building an effective team really requires you to step into that role fully. And I think that these exercises can really help with that as well.
Yeah, and I agree with what you said about leadership, Moshe, and I would perhaps talk about it through my lens as well, which is to be an effective leader. Well, let me back up and say that all humans have something called mirror neurons, which your listeners may or may not know about, meaning that there are literal neurological, cells in our body that their job is to mirror others. So when we are around a person who is very agitated and stressed out, we naturally feel very agitated or more agitated and stressed out. When we are around an individual who is very calm and centered and grounded, we tend to feel more calm and centered and grounded. And it's just this sort of infectious process that connects all of us human beings, whether we like it or not. Our emotional state, if we're not aware of it, it is still having an impact on those around us. So if we are one of these quietly simmering, really angry people and we think we're not showing anybody, no. Everybody around us can sense that something is off. So as a leader, I believe it's really incumbent upon a leader to learn better emotional regulation skills, because if I can be more calm and centered as a leader, I can bring that calm and that confidence to the rest of my team. They can know that they can rely on me, that they can trust me to be my word and take good care of them. I can be a better communicator, which also, by the way, when we are in fight or flight, our prefrontal cortex, which is the most highly evolved part of our brain that we need for complex issues and problem solving, using rationale, logic, solving all sorts of issues in the legal world, of course. When we are in fight or flight, that part of our brain loses blood flow. It does not work as well because our limbic system, our lizard brain, is all fired up and it's taking the blood flow because it's reading the situation as life-threatening. So, I mean, if for no other reason than you want to be a really effective salesperson, an effective attorney, effective in the courtroom, effective when you're giving a speech, learning these skills literally helps our brain process and work better.
Awesome. Love it. Our time is up. So the way I close out the show is to ask you two things. Number one, if somebody resonated with you, they feel like, oh, I need Ingela in my life somehow. What is the next steps for them to take to get in touch with you or learn more from you? The second thing is, if you can leave one parting piece of wisdom or advice with our audience, what would that be?
Great. I will start with how to get in contact with me, and folks can just come to my website, which is www.courageousartistry.com. That's all one word. You'll find a contact me button. I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. LinkedIn, I'm there under my name, Ingela Onstad, which I'm sure will be in the show notes. I would love to set up a consultation with any of your listeners who resonated with what I had to say today. It's a no strings attached consultation just to see if we're a good fit. Once again, I try to believe and practice the mantra that the right clients who need me will come my way and I will resonate with them, and vice versa. And those will be the clients that are for me. And then if I could leave one piece of parting wisdom for your listeners, I think that it would be something along these lines. So many of us get so focused on the words that we use, and especially folks who are highly intelligent, intellectual, high functioning. But our body and our emotions are communicating so much to people around us. So folks tend to get so hyper-focused on what words to use and on the content of what we are saying, and they obsess about that. And they forget or they discount that our physical presence, our well-being, how we are feeling inside of our bodies is just broadcasting volumes to those around us. So we might like the message that somebody has, or we might like the services in theory, but if we don't feel good around that person, if their body language and their energy is reading tense, stressed, angry, afraid, whatnot, we will pick up on that, and that will read as incongruence to us. So I would advise your listeners, no matter what it is that they do, to take their mental and emotional well-being a little bit more seriously, and to recognize that in order to sell effectively or be at all effective in our professions in the world, we have to think of ourselves as a whole. We're not allowed to just compartmentalize the head stuff.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ingela, for your time, for your energy, and this amazing information. This has just been an amazing episode. Folks, if you got value from this episode and you're not yet subscribed to the podcast, we do this every week with amazing people. And you want to make sure you know when we release the next episode, which happens every Thursday morning. So hit the subscribe button in your podcast player so you get notified when we set that up for you. The other thing is we strive on and grow on your sharing this with others. So if you have another attorney friend or just a friend, anybody who this episode would help, just take a moment and share this episode with them. You can alter their life in a positive way. You can change their life, and you have the power to do that in literally 30 seconds by just sharing this episode with them. So take out your phone, hit that share button, and send it via text message to a friend of yours. Thank you so much. And until next time, let's keep our law firms profitable. See you next week.